DW Africa Link.
Mozambique appeals for continued solidarity, flexible and front-loaded financing and sustained support.
A disaster across Southern Africa, and the scale is impossible to ignore. Torrential rains and floods have killed over 200 people across Mozambique, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. More than 300,000 people have been forced away from their homes. Entire communities have been washed away. So what's causing the severe weather conditions, and is there a way out? That's what's coming up. I am Eddy Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Southern Africa is no stranger to floods. What's new is their frequency, intensity, and scale. According to a study by the World Weather Attribution, parts of South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe received 12 months' worth of rain in just about 10 days. Can you imagine that? In South Africa, flood waters ripped through infrastructure, including parts of Kruger National Park, washing away bridges and access roads, with damage running into tens of millions of dollars. But that's nothing compared to human lives lost across the region. For more on this, let's bring in Jasper Knight, a climatologist at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa, and DW's Thuso Khumalo, our correspondent in South Africa. Hello and welcome to Africa Link, both of you. Thuso, you are our eyes and ears on the ground. Can you paint a picture of how severe the situation is?
The floods have been devastating to communities. I mean, people have lost relatives, families have lost homes. I mean, if you have in a rural setting where you've got about 3 to 4 huts, all of them flattened in some cases. I mean, you go to villages like Mbaula village near Giyani in Limpopo. About 40 villagers have just been accommodated in a church because there's nothing to cling on in their homes. And remember, in the process, they've lost their beds, their blankets, their clothes. So it's a devastating situation for people, especially in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And remember also, in terms of food, they still have to eat, children still have to go to school, but some places are very inaccessible. Roads have been damaged, the bridges swept away in some cases. So you've got this situation where people have been accommodated, maybe in small churches or small halls, just for them to make ends meet, while the government, authorities and NGO try to find ways of rebuilding their lives, which is not going to be easy now. There are some expectations of more rains coming in some of these places.
What are you seeing or hearing that makes this seem like arguably the worst or one of the worst in the region?
In most cases, we've had these floods, and of course, we've had flooding, but the numbers of deaths, that's what's surprising. In Mozambique, over 100 people are dead. And when you talk about Mpumalanga, over 30 people dead and some still missing. So the number of deaths makes it even more serious now. And of course, the number of displaced in Mozambique, we're talking about over 500 people that are now homeless and that have to be accommodated somewhere. So the extent at which the damage has been done by this particular flood in this particular time, I think for me stands out, because even the needs become more, the impact on people's lives become even more than we've seen before.
Right. Is it a situation that the governments in these worst hit countries are overwhelmed to deal with the situation?
Definitely they are. If you look at when the floods occurred, in most of these cases, you talk to villagers, some of them have had no clue as to whether the floods were going to occur to that extent. So there are no warning systems in some cases where people are warned. And of course, when it comes to preparing or the aftermath of this disaster, you see they're still calling for things like food, accommodation, and organizations to come in, meaning the governments in these places were not prepared and are not in having the capacity to deal with this once and for all and in a speedy manner, because remember, these people's lives are just brought to a stop and they still need to continue living. And so you see the delays in trying to rebuild the lives, the schools, the homes, shows that the governments were not ready for this kind of disaster.
Right. Thank you very much, Thuso, for laying that foundation down for us. Jasper, I'm coming to you now, and it is being described as the worst, or for sure one of the worst in the region. I'm just wondering what has contributed to the severe, tragic situation on the ground right now.
Thanks. Well, that's a really good question to ask. And in a sense, it can be viewed from two different perspectives. The first is the actual kind of weather systems themselves that give rise to heavy rain. And this is the kind of things that then in turn give rise to flooding. But the second element are the actual impacts themselves. So as Thuso mentioned, in terms of impacts, these are the largest floods to have hit the southeastern Southern African region for several decades. And here, of course, we have humanitarian crises unfolding. But the causal factor is actually the heavy rain in the first place. And here, the heavy rain itself is not necessarily out of the order, or unexpected, because we know that in the southeastern part of Southern Africa, on the eastern side of South Africa, in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and so on. At this time of year, we tend to have weather systems coming in from the warm Indian Ocean, bringing heavy rain and giving rise to increased river flooding. And this is a normal part of our everyday climatology that we should experience at this time of year. So if we think back to recent strong cyclones like Cyclone Freddy, Cyclone Idai, Cyclone Dineo, all of these had similar kind of big flood impacts around about this time of year, January, February, in the same geographical region. But an important thing to note at this time is that, first of all, many of the weather systems giving rise to rain had slightly different origins. They were characterized by cut-off lows, and these are different types of weather systems that arise where we have variations in the trajectory of the upper level jet stream. So this spawns low pressure cells as they kind of spin off from the jet stream, and these draw down moist air from the upper atmosphere, and this is what contributes to heavy rain on the land surface. And in addition to this, we are also within what is termed an El Niño situation. And this is a global weather phenomenon that is characterized by variations in global scale, ocean surface patterns and atmospheric circulation patterns. Typically, when we have a La Nina taking place, this tends to give rise to greater amounts of rainfall across Southern Africa. So what we are seeing is really the combination of several factors that can help explain why we are seeing not just high amounts of rainfall, but also the associated negative impacts upon the environment and upon communities.
From all that you're saying, I get the sense that you're suggesting that this would have happened no matter what. And so let's just brace ourselves. Let's fasten our seatbelts and brace ourselves for more heavy rain and flooding. Is that what the message is?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, this is part of a naturally occurring climatology of the weather systems that we experience in this part of the world.
You do realize you sound like the prophet of doom right now.
Well, just because, of course, we have lots of rain, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to lead to hazardous flooding. So for this reason, therefore, we have to think of the reasons why we have big flood impacts associated with these naturally occurring rainfall events.
I think that's actually a good point. So the fact that there are heavy rains does not have to automatically translate into severe flooding to claim lives. So why did it happen, Jasper?
Yeah, well, the flood itself, or the extent of the flood, is in part determined by a wide range of different things. The topography of the land, the presence of low-lying floodplains, the lack of surface vegetation and soils to absorb rainfall, and changes in land use patterns caused by agriculture, urbanization, and poor water management on the part of government infrastructure. So all of these things act in combination. It isn't just one thing in isolation, it's a number of things that interact together. And many studies worldwide have actually tried to explore this in a bit more detail to try to understand when we have big flood events taking place in different parts of the world, to what extent is this caused by natural weather patterns and climate change, and to what extent is it caused by inappropriate human activity in that area. And this is a really important debate to be had, because this can help us identify not only the cause, but also what we do about it.
I mean, look, I'm just wondering how anyone is prepared to deal with a situation where, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are the experts, where a whole year's quantity of rain poured in just a few days. I understand just about 10 days. In 10 days, the amount of rain that poured down was like what you would expect in a whole year. How does anyone prepare for such a situation, really?
Well, to some extent, of course, we know that these things are going to take place. So they should not be unanticipated in terms of the likely impacts of high amounts of rainfall upon the land surface. So if we think about the information that we get in the weather forecast, or even alerts on our phone for hazardous weather events, these tell us what we need to do in response to this. So these things are to some extent anticipated. What is less known, however, is the severity of the impacts. And these are things that tend to be amplified under climate change. So climate change and global warming is making global weather systems work harder and faster. And this can help explain how and why we have more intense rainfall taking place even within a short time period. And this itself gives rise to a situation where floods are more likely to occur.
Can you explain to me why Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and even Eswatini were among the hardest hit? Is there any reason possibly behind that?
Yes, there are several reasons. The first one is their proximity to the warm Indian Ocean. So the Indian Ocean acts as a moisture source for evaporation, for the formation of clouds, and then rain coming from those clouds. So the adjacent water body is a really important component of this. Another component is very often we have relatively big rivers and we have broad, flat river floodplains. So these rivers often spill over their banks and inundate the adjacent floodplains. In addition, we also have, further inland, lots of mountains. So here we have air masses rising up over the mountains, cooling, condensing, and raining out. So here we have a critical combination of, if you like, physical factors in the environment that make this particular part of the world particularly sensitive to be affected by repeated flood events.
Thank you very much for that. Thuso, let me come to you, because at the end of the day, ordinary lives are destroyed when such events occur. Talking about not just people losing their lives, right? There's also loss of infrastructure and people's, properties, houses. It's all gone. What are residents complaining about now in terms of what they believe could have been done differently to save lives?
In some places, residents are complaining about roads that have already been poor, and when the rains came, they were just almost washed away. Some bridges, some residents in Limpopo, they will tell you, have been warning the council to say, please fix this and fix that. And that was not fixed. So because of that, they are also not accessible. Even help, when it wants to get to them, it's difficult to access them because the roads have been completely washed away. And they cannot also go to the best safe areas. So they are saying there are things that could have been done, but others are also saying they should be warning systems that the governments or provincial governments in these areas build up over time, so that citizens, when something is going to happen, they are given a warning and they just take all precautions. If it means moving from their places, they are able to move. But most of them, they are saying they were not informed, except those who listen to radio. And of course, like our expert said, I mean, it was expected to be rain as usual, and people would ordinarily think they'll be safe after. So they need more systems to warn them. They need roads and infrastructure to be strong enough so that when such rains happen, they are able to quickly move off and escape to safer areas.
Right. And what about getting aid to the people in need right now? How is that going?
It's also a challenge. I mean, especially with the rural part areas of Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and even in Mozambique. These areas are ordinarily, usually, you find there's bad infrastructure, even when there are no rains. So with these rains, some of these communities are even difficult to reach for those that are bringing in aid, and for them also to move to areas where they can get food. Like, everything has been washed away. You can imagine you are left there, your blankets are gone, your beds are gone, your clothes are gone, food is gone, and you need to go to a place where you can get them. One villager in Limpopo was saying, we can't access our neighbors there. We know they were badly affected, but we can't access them because they were standing across a river that is still flooded up to now. So such things are becoming a problem to villagers to try and settle. But of course, in some areas, NGOs have just got in to give food parcels, to give clothes. And of course, the government has also sent in some experts to try and assess different families to see what the needs are. But how that is going to take is going to be a long time because of the poor infrastructure that was already poor before this rain.
Jasper, you've already made it clear that heavy rainfall that could lead to serious flooding is something that we should get used to because of natural extreme weather patterns, as you mentioned. So what happens now? What needs to be done now to make sure when it happens again next year that lives will not be destroyed?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, the prime focus of any kind of government response needs to be reducing the impacts upon communities and reducing loss of life and reducing economic and social impacts. Now, we do have mechanisms in place for doing this because, of course, we have weather warning systems. But here, of course, it's all very well tracking the movement of weather systems in the atmosphere. But unless this weather warning is transmitted effectively to communities, and if we have appropriate municipal responses at the local level, then of course these warnings aren't going to mean very much. So we do need to have more effective liaison with local communities. We also need to ensure that we have mechanisms in place for dealing effectively and in a timely manner in order to respond to these events when they take place and immediately afterwards. Now, in South Africa, we have the Disaster Management Act, and this provides the statutory framework for national and municipal and provincial governments in dealing with weather and climate disasters. But a key limitation of this legislative framework is to ensure that government departments talk to each other. And this is the real problem in every single case. So whether that's at national scale or at municipal scale. And this is critically required in order to ensure that, as Thuso said earlier on, impacts upon people's health, housing, education, transport, infrastructure, and so on are dealt with in an integrated kind of way. If we can do that, it's much more cost effective, it's much better, and people are able to get their lives together much more quickly. If we don't, it's going to be much more expensive, much more drawn out, and people are going to increasingly suffer.
And I understand climate change sometimes is human-made, or human beings contribute to climate change. So on that level, what can individuals do to contribute to a situation where the next time such heavy rain falls, that lives will not be hit that much?
Well, there's a whole range of things that we can do as individuals and as communities to keep ourselves safer and keeping our communities safer as well. So the first is being aware of these weather and climate events. So being aware of weather forecasts and information that comes to us from the media and from local municipalities. It's also useful to ensure that we have resources and means to be able to enable us to help or cope with any particular situation. So a simple thing, for example, keeping a first aid kit somewhere where we can store it that is available to help if someone's hurt, or keeping a bottle of fresh water somewhere to help us. So these are kind of simple things that we can do even within our own households. But an important thing to note going forward is that scientific monitoring of weather and climate systems, both locally and globally, really highlights the fact that climate change is amplifying or making worse all of these naturally occurring weather and climate events. So climate models universally suggest that under global warming, we are more likely to experience more erratic patterns of rainfall. And when it does rain, it's going to be much more intense. So as an example, I would just like to mention the KZN floods of 2022, which killed over 430 people. So climate modelling of this particular event showed that under climate change, such heavy rainfall as was experienced in that event is much more likely to take place. So here we have a halving of the recurrence interval. In other words, it will likely occur twice as often as under climate change as under non-climate change. In addition, climate change increases the intensity of the rainfall. So climate modelling of the KZN floods showed that the intensity of rainfall was increased between about 4 and 8%. That may not sound very much, but it's very significant. Meaning that under climate change, we can anticipate these big flood events much more frequently, and the rain causing them is going to be much more intense. So this will give rise to more intense floods more quickly.
All hands on deck. It doesn't have to be that bad. And we all have a role to play in making the environment better and safer for all of us. Jasper Knight, climatologist at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa, and DW's Thuso Khumalo, our correspondent in South Africa. Thank you both very much for your contribution to this.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Get the stories that are shaping the continent here on Africa Link.
Now, according to the World Health Organization, more than 1 million people across Southern Africa have been affected by the recent flooding, and their frustration is clear.
Humanitarian partners are supporting government-led efforts across these countries through search and rescue operations and multi-sectoral assistance, including emergency shelter, water, sanitation, health, food assistance, and protection services. In a world of financial resources, we must shift from reacting to disasters to acting before they strike. 1, by early investments in early warning. 2, strengthening national preparedness and local response capacities. 3, ensuring predictable, flexible funding. Preparedness and anticipatory action are amongst the most cost-effective tools we have to reduce humanitarian suffering.
Mozambique appeals for continued solidarity, flexible and front-loaded financing and sustained support.
Africa produces just 3 to 4% of global emissions, according to the United Nations, yet it bears some of the worst impacts of climate change, costing hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. Now, while the continent cannot stop the rains, Southern Africa can stop them from becoming catastrophes through stronger early warning systems, smarter land use planning, and climate-resilient infrastructure. And at the community level, safer housing, restored wetlands, and more resilient livelihoods could make the difference between temporary flooding and permanent loss. What do you think? Please share your thoughts with us on Facebook at DW Africa. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Eddy Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW, made for minds.